Have you ever not slept for so long that you started hallucinating? What was your experience? A buddy of mine landed a painting job working inside of a big commercial building, and he basically stayed in the place for 6 days straight smoking crystal meth and painting to meet his deadline and avoid hiring a crew to help him. On the 6th day the building caught fire and he ran into the lobby and was pulling people out into the streets and yelling to call 911. The fireman showed up and couldn't locate a fire because there was none. He was hallucinating. I went roughly 4 days on 5 hours sleep total. I could function fine, but I would just constantly hear things like people mumbling right next to me. Yeah. It's not like you see pink elephants on parade or anything. You think you hear people chatting behind you, or you see stuff moving just on the edge of your vision. Super creepy and unfun, but not particularly dramatic. This exactly. I have a 10-month-old baby who does not sleep well, so neither do I. Nothing that sounds super extreme, but when you're woken up every hour all night long for weeks and months on end, the effects add up. It's getting better now, but for a few months I would see things move, or lights out of the corner of my eyes. I just learned to ignore it and accept that sleep deprivation hallucinations are just part of being a parent. Yeah. After 70 hours or so, it's pretty disorienting, and rational thinking starts to get very slow. The hallucinations are not realistic, but are more like gaps in your vision that are shaped like things. Might see a silhouette at a distance, or briefly around a corner. Very difficult to function in this state. Would not recommend. Okay, story time. My mom suffers from narcolepsy, and one of the first treatments they gave her basically drove her also completely insane. She was up for 5 days. One day I walked into her bedroom hearing her talking to someone. I look around and ask her who she is talking to, and she tells me the lady in red. There is no one in the room at all, just us. I ask where is the lady and she says the lady sits on the dresser and talks to her all night. I was like 14 at the time, so I went to the kitchen and hid her medicine until my stepdad got home and could take her to the hospital. The doctor was super upset about the meds her doctor had given her, it was way too much. Anyway, she stopped seeing the lady after they got all that straightened out. That is scary. I check her meds now every time before she takes them. Her doctors have given her meds that don't mix well 2 times now. Ex-addict. Was driving home after a 3-day meth bender. Needed food, so drove into a McDonald's drive-thru. When asked for my order I replied McChicken meal, please. Then they asked me again, and I said McChicken meal, please. Then they asked me again, and I was like, can't you duck and hear me? McChicken meal. And that's when I realized I wasn't actually saying anything. I was just replying in my head. Overseas on a deployment. Started getting sleep deprived for a period of time. Started hallucinating the big date / palm trees moving across the road like in the Lord of the Rings when the trees walk. I suffered from horrific insomnia about 12 years ago. I was on Lexapro, and one of the side effects is insomnia. At the time, that wasn't well documented, so I tried everything from Ambien to alcohol so I could sleep. I would usually get about a 3-hour nap at most before being awake again. I would go 3 to 5 days without sleeping. Eventually, I hit the point of desperation and start recreational substances to try and knock myself out. There were several occasions of hallucinations, but the one that sticks out is truly terrible. I was on day 6 without sleeping at least 5 hours. I was laying in bed and a friend came in to start talking with me. We had many great conversations since our friendship began, but hadn't talked in a while at that point. I told him how bad I was struggling and that honestly, killing myself would have been easier. He said he felt the same way many times, but that it was a terrible idea, and I knew how badly it had messed up his family. When I looked at him, he was a bloody mess on the side of his face, jaw ripped apart, teeth missing, but talking to me like nothing was wrong. He had been dead for a few years at that point. Suicide. Shot himself in his garage after years of substance abuse. And I just had a 3-hour conversation with a hallucination of a dead friend. I ended up switching meds to Celexa and my sleep issues disappeared within a month. So, if you are having sleeping issues, please Go see a document. It's a dark place that damn near took me. I was on Lexapro, and one of the side effects is insomnia. Wait, really? Exclamation mark. No one told me that. I'm on Lexapro now and sometimes I have trouble getting to sleep at night. I really don't mind though, because I used to be on a really high dose of Zyprexa, and that knocked me out cold, and it was so bad that when I woke up in the morning I was still completely exhausted and had to drink an entire pot of coffee just to be able to wake up and start working. And to make matters worse, I was knocked out, so cold that I couldn't even dream at all. So I absolutely hated sleep, wouldn't you? If you passed out completely exhausted and woke up instantaneously, but it's actually 8 hours later and you're still completely exhausted. Exclamation mark. What a waste of time. And now my psychiatrist wants to increase my Lexapro. But at the same time she also wants to put me on a small dose of Zyprexa to help me sleep. I wonder what will happen. But for now I generally get 7 to 8 hours of sleep. Though sometimes I might only get 4. But I still feel at least somewhat rested in the morning. And on rare occasions I'll just sleep all day. How long have you been on it? Mine got progressively worse the longer I was on it. It was a slow descent into madness and the doctors couldn't figure it out. Ambien didn't work on me. That's how bad it was. So make sure your doctor knows you are starting to have sleeping issues so you both can keep an eye on it. I hadn't slept for about 72 hours when I went to the doc gave me Ambien. I go home, get in bed and take one. A few minutes later, the floor was covered in water and the walls were melting. It was raining outside, and the water on my windows was marching in formation. I've never known whether that was sleep deprivation or the effects of Ambien. I've never taken another. Fucking shadow people. It's bad for you. You shouldn't do it. But if you're asking this question, you're the type to try. Remember, it's not real and relax. Go to sleep. For a while, when I was active duty I got really paranoid about the shadow people for obvious reasons. You have no idea the relief I felt when I found out I wasn't the only one who saw them. I really thought I was losing it, but man, I was just exhausted. I stayed up for 3 days straight when I was 17. On the third day, I kept hearing people call my name, as if they wanted to ask me a question. It didn't help that I also thought it would be a good idea to go to school that day. Multiple times a day, I would bolt upright and look around to see who wanted my attention, only to see my fellow students huddled over their work. It got worse as the day went. My friends were a little worried about how weird I was acting. I walked home after school, listening to my headphones as usual, but I still kept hearing someone call my name. The music made it worse. Whatever I was hearing was already kind of muffled, and having a song playing in my ears only seemed to obscure it more. When I finally got home, I told my mom I wasn't feeling well, went to my room and went straight to sleep. At 4 in the afternoon, as nodded off, I heard that voice calling for me again, making me jerk out of my sleep. This repeated a couple times until I convinced myself that I already told my mom I was sick, and if she really needed me, she could come get me. I finally went to sleep and didn't wake until 2 AM to use the bathroom, and then went to sleep afterwards again until 9 AM the next day. I was an idiot. It's almost a regular occurrence for me by now, because I suffer from insomnia. There are 3 different types of hallucinations for me. 1. Funny, useless shit I know is fake. 2. Shit that could be real or not. 3. Extremely scary and traumatic shit I know is fake, but rattles me up every single time. Usually, they appear in that order. Pro tip: if you are experiencing visual hallucinations and you aren't sure whether something is real or not, take a photo with your smartphone and look at that. It is very unlikely that you hallucinate the same shit twice and in the exact same position. Works for me, at last. After a while I start to become seriously paranoid and I start hearing voices and things like that. It's not very fun. I have some serious issues with sleep and sometimes it will get to the point where I will start seeing things out the corners of my eye that aren't actually happening, and I manage to scare the shit out of myself. Please get enough sleep. Don't fall into the habit of staying up for days on end. The longer you stay up, the harder it is to fall asleep. Once in my early 20s I took acid and didn't sleep at all for like 3 days. At one point on the third day a door told me to go duck myself, and I really wasn't sure if it was from the drugs building up over time or because I was so tired. I guess there's some confusion over the wording, but this was not one dose. This was multiple red doses over the course of 3 days with diminishing returns. I had really bad sleep problems for years. At one point I went to a party having been awake for 36 hours when arriving. I didn't really hallucinate also because I couldn't sleep. But when I finally did, I got the sleep I needed. The problem was mostly falling asleep. For me, stress and lack of sleep triggers some form of sleep paralysis and these weird dreams where I'm lying down somewhere and I can't see properly and I can't get up because everything is just so blurry and spinning around. It made me wake up in cold sweats, and I remember once waking up and falling back asleep so many times because I was too exhausted to keep my eyes open that I called my mom crying because I did not know whether I was awake or not. I'm better now. During exam week I pulled 3 all-nighters in the library between tests. The library was open 24 hours, so I'd just stay up all night making note cards, then go take an exam during the day. I lived off campus and didn't want to spend the gas money. I'd go to the most isolated area, but the library would pretty much be cleared out by midnight. I started to see glimpses of people, and I thought it was a bunch of students ducking with me, but there was no one on that floor. I thought the lights went off at some point and maybe it was a sensor, so I started jumping around to reactivate it, but obviously it was light the whole time. After 30 hours I started seeing insects on the walls and on my desk that weren't there. Might have just been the light or paranoia because I'm massively afraid of spiders. Made it to 50 hours without really seeing anything else though. In college there we had a major group project. We all stayed on campus for 48 hours and no sleep. Let's just say that by the end we were all hallucinating while writing our code. At one point I remember thinking my code was talking, but the music had just started playing. So in training to join the British Army Infantry, everyone does a defense exercise. Basically you deploy onto the area, then spend 72 straight hours digging trenches. No sleep, no rest. It's a double whammy between sleep deprivation and exhaustion. Although I never hallucinated, I did pass out onto some bloke though. I did see a few blokes experience crazy stuff. One bloke walked into a foggy field and was missing for hours. Once he realized he was lost, he laid on the floor, flipping between the channels on his radio saying hello and hoping someone would hear him. Another bloke who was a Welsh speaker lost the ability to distinguish between the two languages. He'd speak to you in Welsh, then get annoyed when you didn't understand him, believing he was speaking perfect English. Yeah, we pulled a solid week of defensive exercise with sleep departure. Shadow people are the worst. Always in and out of your peripherals. Bushes move, sneak up on you in the twilight. The worst was about day 4. Moving into position for a night raid. Somewhere along the way, while marching in full fighting order, I must have fallen asleep. In my mind, found myself entering an old-timey jazz club filled with shadow people. I stood around watching them all, till suddenly a shadow person with glowing eyes jumped out and attacked. Woke up with the section 2 Ike grabbing my chest and pulling me out of a ditch. In retrospect I probably got focused in the cat eyes on the helmet in front of me, got hypnotized by them, and wandered off into the ditch. What was maybe worse than the sleep deprivation itself was post-exercise the promise of extended leave. Only when, if, we could sleep for over 8 straight hours. We all thought that would be no problem. We longed for rest and would nod off for a few minutes every chance we got. When we were finally ordered into forced rest for leave, none of us could sleep for longer than 15 minutes at a time. It was pure torture. In the end our extended leave was 2 days of teaching our bodies to sleep again with only a single day of leave for most of us at the end. Moral of the story, I would not recommend. OHH, I have a great cautionary tale for this. Me, 19. Freshly sent to Japan for the USAF. A little pretext here. Japan is famous for the car culture there, and it inspires hundreds of thousands of people. One particular multi-track circuit that is incredibly famous is called Ebisu Circuit, and it has a festival a few times a year called Drift Match Series. This particular event draws drivers and spectators from around the world to thrash their cars for 72 hours straight for one cheap price. Influences fly in and buy a car for the week a lot, and it's as important. I can't remember what caused me to stay up all night. I might have been gaming, or I might have been studying. But it was Match Series weekend at Ebisu, and Adam LZ, famous drift YouTuber, was gonna be there with Taylor A, with Elisha being just around 150 kilometers away. I started my car and set out on my journey. I had never used the tolls before, so I ended up driving 7 hours instead of the originally predicted 3. I was also freshly imported into Japan and had yet to take my car on a true drive through the Japanese country, so I trucked on through single lane roads through rice paddies and small mountain villages. Honestly, not the kind of place my drift car was suited for, but it was dope. I ended up getting to the circuit at like 3:30, met the crew, and hung out for a while. Practiced on the skidpad, but I had to get back to base before 12. I stayed for an hour and turned around and went home. I had been awake for close to 64 hours at that point. I really didn't have any issues until about 10:30. Back in the thick concrete jungle of Tokyo, I had a few hallucinations. But the worst was where I drove my car into a hole in the middle of the road. I was out for at least a few seconds, probably sleeping. Unfortunate that the roads were next to empty around me, but I could have died that night and everyone around me was in danger. Do yourself and everyone around you a favor. Don't drive tired. I once worked a 17-hour shift. I was working an event for a cocktail company. Work started early in the morning, and I drove about 30 minutes to their company premises. The event was a private wedding in a field, and we were a pop-up cocktail bar. After loading all the fresh fruit onto the van, I was driven about an hour away to the venue, where we unloaded the van. We had to physically set up a metal bar, stock it up, prep ingredients, decorate it, and get all the glassware ready. People started ordering drinks at 3 p.m. and it went on late into the night. Although we had breaks, we were on our feet all night. The person in charge of our van had forgotten to pack a light, so we loaded the van back up in the dark. Almost ran over one of the guests who had passed out in the middle of the field, and I cut myself pretty badly. We got back to the barn storage at about 4 a.m. and I had to drive home. I was so worn out. I was seeing cows everywhere. I kept having to stop for cows in the road, cows in the bushes on the side of the road, but none of it was real. When I eventually got to lighter roads, I stopped seeing shit that wasn't there, and I'll never put myself through something so dangerous again. Had to make a 24-hour drive to get back home for family. My spouse and I split the drive up in shifts while I was doing 80 miles per hour in the dark, and I thought to myself, these deer running alongside me sure can run fast. It took a good minute for me to realize I was seeing things. Visions. People existing where they shouldn't be, like walking across rafters and ducks high above factory floors. Memory loss. Irritability like you've never been through before. Pain. You lose time. An hour here, an hour there. Your cognitive abilities decline. I've gone week-long stretches where I probably averaged between 10 to 15 hours sleep over a 7-day period, so many times that it became normal. It wasn't that the stretches themselves were long, maybe 20 hours at most, but there was no deep sleep in the downtime. Without deep sleep you start to go mad. And I've been pretty close to going over the edge. I was going through a lot with an abusive ex. He'd keep me up for ages, and when I could finally sleep I would have nightmares. So I started hallucinating spiders in my ceiling, and it felt like hands were touching me. It lasted for days. Since the hallucinations messed up the little sleep I got diagnosed with a beginning psychosis and schizotypical disorder, mostly because I didn't dare tell them about my ex, so they couldn't set a PTSD diagnosis for me. They started giving me drugs to help the psychosis, but since it was because of my ex and lack of sleep, it didn't really help, and I had to deal with just being drugged as well. Please click subscribe if you enjoyed this video.